Welcome, welcome, friends. Welcome to the Reclaiming Soul Work podcast, where we are reclaiming the sacred in soul work, y'all, for healers, counselors, practitioners, and social workers, one episode at a time. My name is Biani. Introductions a little bit later, but before we do that, I wanted to welcome you to our newest season, y'all. Season 2 of Reclaiming Soul Work podcast. And Sequoia and I couldn't be more excited to really be here in our second season. And this season is really dedicated to unlearning. So we are really excited for you to join us on this ride of unlearning that we believe is really important as practitioners and social workers who are really committed to decolonize healing. And so, yeah, y'all, we want you to get ready for today's episode. Jane Addams was a racist and other things we need to unlearn from our schooling experience. And, get ready for an important and life-changing conversation that we know is going to benefit us, Sequoia and I, you, and the communities and people you hold space for.
Welcome, everyone. Again, Reclaiming Soul Work is a heart-centered podcast by two queer Black femme healers and spiritual social workers who explore the intersection of magic, spirituality, identity, and ancestral connections through the lens of tarot, divination, mysticism, mental health, and everything in between. As Biani said, my name is Sequoia. I use she and her pronouns. And I am a social worker and wear a lot of different hats. And grateful for that. I am currently in Anchorage on Denaina land. My family is originally from Selma, Alabama, from that area, and just want to lift my ancestors and my elders up as we move into our second season of the podcast. And we're really excited to be here with you all. We've got some really good topics and conversations planned for you all. So we hope that, you'll join us and let us know what you think. Um, I am an Aquarius sun and an Aries moon. And I am currently, let's see, what can I share that I'm reading? Oh, I actually shared an article that I pulled today to read. The Harvard Business Review did an article today on 3 types of burnout. And I am reading about that. It seems pretty interesting, so I'm going to check that out. And then what's been bringing me joy? Let me see. Um, I would say I am in a busy season right now, just related to work and managing and navigating quite a few things. And while those areas of my life can be overwhelming, again, I'm grateful to be in the place that I'm in. I'm grateful for the support systems that I have throughout this busy season in my life. And so I would definitely say like that's bringing me joy, being able to connect and know that if I need anything, I definitely have people in my life right now that are willing to, reach out and help. Um, what about you, Biani? Oh, I can't hear you.
I love those shares. Sorry about that, y'all.
That's okay.
Um, so my name is Biani. I use she, they pronouns. Um, my people are from Dominican Republic um, and also New York, like Muncie Lenape. So I'm thinking about my lineage a lot lately. So that's something that just came to me. I'm thinking about them a lot right now. The Taino Macorix people, it's a traditional, like the actual name of Saint Domingue, and Muncie Lenape folks in the Bronx. And I live, work, and play in Lenape territory, Philadelphia, also known as Philadelphia. And like Sequoia, and I realize now because we're both Aries moons. I don't know why I always get that out of my head, but we both have our moon in Aries. I feel like that feels like important. But I'm juggling a lot of things as a parent, homeschool parent, private practice, and writing as a writer too. And so I feel like this season is kind of like slowly picking up. But right now it's really mellow and I'm trying to like ride that wave a little bit. Um, and then this is my birth month. So I'm also riding that kind of reflective wave of just kind of reflecting on this new year that I'm preparing for. And so I feel a little bit like real like pensive lately and just, being in the space of quiet and silence. And I'm a Virgo sun. I just said it. Virgo sun, Cancer rising, Aries moon. I just learned actually that my Virgo sun is in Decan 3, which is associated with Taurus. So I've been going down that like lane because I never really identify with the traditional or like the stereotypical Virgo because I am a very messy person. Like I like organization, but I'm not type A in that way. And so learning about my Decan 3 just opened my world the last couple weeks because I'm very much about beauty and pleasure and just being in nature, and my femness is important. Like there's a lot that is starting to really open up for me around this new awareness. I am I think what's bringing me joy right now is like spending time with my kids. I've I just I just realize how fast time goes with them, and it is just really how precious like this. We really time is the most precious commodity we have. Like that's what I'm really learning, and you blink and a year has passed. You blink and people are moving on, making developmental milestones, especially young people. And so I've really been trying to kind of slow it down. Just really slow it down. Like, can they just wait to grow up? Not that that can really happen, but yeah, I think joy has been just watching my kids learn how to play soccer and take up new interests. It's just been really nice. And yeah, that's it for my intro.
Cool.
So y'all, like we mentioned before, we're gonna get right into it. We're gonna go right into our topic today. This is the second season of Reclaiming Soul Work, and we're dedicating this season to the practices and wisdom of unlearning that we believe is required as spiritual social workers, as helping professionals, anybody that's sort of in the work of holding space. We think unlearning is really important, and we really believe there's a sacredness to unlearning and a magic that happens when we make space for unlearning. It requires a level of courage, of curiosity, of awe, of wonder, of really being in a space of asking questions, and we think is so important that we wanted to dedicate this season to unlearning. So today, episode 7 kicks off this unlearning journey that we're all being invited to. We are inviting you on, and we are on this journey with you. And so we really want to encourage you to like spend time thinking about the things that you're unlearning. And we're going to share a little bit about our guiding question for today's episode. But in the meantime, you might want to reflect on, you might want to put it in you can write it in the comments. We'd love to hear it. Let us know the things that you are unlearning, the lessons, the teachings that you unlearned in your schooling experiences or your training, whatever got you to this point of this field of social work. What is it time for you to release? What is time for you to unlearn? What is time for you to discard? What is time for you to challenge? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And today, as the title suggests, and I want to say it again, Jane Addams was a racist. And there are other things that we need to unlearn because of that. And we're going to sort of just to walk you through today, we are going to talk a little bit about Jane Addams, who she was, and the historical importance, like her role in shaping social work, as well as focusing on this guiding question: what problematic lessons or teachings have you learned from social work school that you are ready to unlearn or release? That's what we're getting into today, y'all. This is meaty. So we're going to invite you, have your notebook ready, your favorite writing utensil, or you might want to type it or record your reflections and thoughts. We're going to go deep, y'all. We're inviting deep transformation on this journey of unlearning. So I will pass it over to my friend, Sequoia. You want to get it going?
Okay.
If you want to talk about Jane Addams, if not, we can start. We can both.
Yeah, we're talking about Jane Addams.
Yes.
Okay. So basically, Jane Addams is one of the kind of initial folks that you learn about in social work programs, the settlement house, kind of setting in that context, and that being our understandings of kind of the birthplace of social work, if you will. A lot of my program, again, like those foundational one-on-one kind of social work classes started there. One of the things that we talked about in our IG live, and definitely check that out because we dropped some gems, some nuggets in that, was just the kind of understanding of again that foundational kind of one-on-one area, but then also thinking more about what else could have potentially been happening during that time. And so yeah, I always like to get into a conversation about Jane Addams, in settlement houses. One, because, there's just some history, some backdrop, that doesn't necessarily get talked about, not only in social work classes, but how that also kind of frames our concept of like what the social work uh, practice is. And the thing that we mentioned during our IG live was that, you know, Black and Brown communities, we had been doing collective care. We had been in community with each other, taking care of each other in this very collective type of way, in that sense of, sharing food with each other, raising our children in a village type of mentality, also taking care of elders, from a village mentality. And so when we think about social work and this introduction related to Jane Addams and the settlement house and things of that nature, for me, it kind of erases practices that have been going on way before Jane Addams kind of came along, and just in the sense of how we take care of each other.
Right. And um, so I agree with Sequoia, and I wanted to add that the thing about Jane Addams that's really interesting is that, there are so many statues, there are so many like social work programs named after her. There's this way that we consider her like a social work pioneer. She really cared about children and child advocacy. She was really like opinionated about lynchings, and some people would argue that she really was committed to like she was like against segregation and committed to abolishing lynchings. But there's more to her story that we never really hear about in our field. And for us, part of why, and we will do a deep dive of Jane Addams and like social work a little later into the like maybe even next season, we're thinking. But the reason we wanted to talk about Jane Addams is because there's a way that she tends to represent the sort of elements of social work that are tied to saviorism and tied to the role of white women in social work historically. And yeah, I think what happens is that we don't make space for the truth about her, like all the sides of her, specifically around like her stance around lynchings and her relationship to Ida B. Wells, and how she was against lynching, but also justified lynchings too, which for us is interesting, right? Because I think there's a lot of conversation about Jane Addams not being a racist, quote unquote, because she was one of the founding members of the NAACP, and she really cared about desegregating schools in Chicago public school systems, yes, but that doesn't mean she's not racist. And it doesn't mean that, and what does that say about the field, our profession, right? It says a lot, y'all. It does say a lot. And so I think we really have to be critical. We have to keep asking questions. And there's a lot that we don't hear about around Jane Addams. All we hear is that she was against lynching and she was against segregation. And again, you're right, like the settlement houses, there's a lot that she gets rewarded for. Like the kind of memories we have about her feel a bit limited. And she's a part of our history, you know, she's a part of the history of social work. And how are we not going to be making space for that? So there is I think when we talk about racism in social work, it's really interesting because when I think about Jane Addams and her stance on lynching, she had like a lot of contradicting views about it. And to me, that really connects to the ways that social work has a lot of contradicting views about racism and race and supremacy culture and saviorism and our role as social workers. Are we social workers who uphold this system? Are we social workers that interrupt this system and are committed to abolition and freedom? So I think her contradictions are important to hold. One being how she cared about children, right? And also cared about women's rights, for sure. And I would say maybe was in line with like the suffragist movement, for sure. She had a relationship with Ida B. Wells, yes. What does that mean, right? We have to ask too, what does that mean? Because from my research, Ida B. Wells spent a lot of time challenging Jane Addams and her racist views, especially around lynching. And she started to write about lynching, saying that she rejected it, right? And she blamed white people for like perpetuating this illegal and these violent acts at the time. And at the same time, she described the victims who were being lynched as bestial, as wild, uncontrolled, right? Like that if anything, that justifies lynching, right? To position it as lynching is wrong, and yet these people who were being lynched kind of deserved it in a way. And so she was challenged by Ida B. Wells. I believe there are many exchanges between them. And, we knew at the time Ida B. Wells was a pioneer in the anti-lynching campaigns, an amazing journalist, writer. And I think it's interesting that we forget that part about Jane Addams. And that's just one example that I'm sharing. I feel like I'm rambling. I wonder if there's anything that's coming up for you, Sequoia, or...
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes, to everything that you said, first off. And I think that one of the reasons that it's important that the entire picture of Jane Addams and the history, behind her work is so important is for exactly what you named, related to saviorism. A lot of our practice, again, if that's the aspect of social work history that we're teaching, and we only talk about it in this particular context or view, then we are what's being communicated is this savioristic approach to how to do social work and what a social worker is. And I feel
Mm,
like, even in this conversation behind the relationship between Jane Addams and Ida B. Wells, specifically around this topic of lynching and her thoughts about, people of color or folks that might, have been considered other, during that time, while, in the social work profession, we don't use those types of words related to how we describe people of color or even like people of color social work students. We get
mm,
this through professionalism. We get these messages through, the way that you are attempting to build community does not fit within the parameters of what a professional is. And,
mm,
if you don't assimilate, comply to what we consider a professional, in your practicums, you're written up, you get low kind of low, I was gonna say marking, but that's not the right word, like low scores,
mm,
low evaluations related to how you are able to, again, really assimilate to this white professionalism. And
mm.
so to me, I see it as another way to communicate that in more modern parameters, context, if you will. Um,
Wait, can you
yeah.
tell me? Can you say it again? Like, I think I want to understand. I feel like I lost it, but this could be me. You're saying that the way that we talk about Jane Addams and this kind of saviorism complex um, shows up in a modern way, like the way that we're trained as social workers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely. Definitely. And then that piece about well, let me stick with one thing and then go to that. So we talked about this. I think either we talked about this a little bit in our IG live or we talked about it like one on one. Um, the way that if you are on your kind of initial journey to social work, right? So, meaning you're in school and you are learning about the profession, there's a certain type of context and way that social work is presented, right? And so, when we think about the ways that we're unlearning some of those aspects. I think about our conversation from the IG Live when we talked about the differences in macro and micro and how we're not taught how to be whole social workers. So to me, if we aren't taught how to be whole social workers, then we go into these other contexts in our position feeling like we have the answers and if our clients, if the community does not assimilate to what we're asking them to do, then again, like they're kind of seen as other. Does that make
Mm.
sense?
Yeah. Yes. Thank you for that. Absolutely.
Okay. Okay.
Absolutely.
So that's just kind of what I'm thinking related to that. And we may have kind of veered down a different
Yeah.
role. So I'm going to bring it back. I'm going to bring it back to this question, that you pose, which is what problematic lessons or teachings have you learned from social work school that you are ready to unlearn? And so when we think about this piece about Jane Addams, you
Mm,
know, again, like that white saviorism, how do people of color even perpetuate saviorism, and that I think that's a conversation for a topic for a larger conversation because to me it's not necessarily done in the same way that white social workers do it. I feel like for myself, the way that it shows up is not taking a break when I need to, feeling like my
mm,
clients, like what are my clients gonna do if I'm not available to them? So to me, as a Black social worker, like that's how I feel like saviorism is perpetuated. And so
mm.
thinking about that.
Well, can we slow
Um,
down for a moment?
okay.
Can we? I want to take that in, and I'm wondering for those who are watching this like recorded, just taking that in. That is so real. That is so real. Like you're talking about the burnout, the fatigue, the way that we overextend ourselves as Black,
Mhm.
brown, indigenous, melanated folks who happen to be social workers. Like that really lands on me because I've been navigating that on and off the last couple years. And it was one of the things that we mentioned in IG, like the role of service, the way that we conceive our work as like providing service, and how we like give of ourselves to the point of our detriment, you know. Whew, I just wanted to invite some like some
And I
moment
don't
of like,
know. And that's why I say, like, that's it's a topic for a larger conversation, and maybe I'm applying it in a way that isn't accurate, but that's how I see it.
no, I think that's real. Because let's be honest, right? And I'm curious about folks who are tuning in. Let us know in the comments too, like your relationship to saviorism. We all have been socialized. We've been fed this in our social work programs. Um, we've been fed white saviorism. We've been fed saviorism, martyrdom. This idea that social workers, quote unquote, there's a hierarchy. Like we've been fed the hierarchy. This idea that, and I think it's connected to Jane Addams because she worked with families, especially children, like that social workers like know better, right, than the families that they work in community with, right?
Absolutely,
And that
absolutely.
we've been taught to think that we're going into these communities who don't have resources, who don't have their own, like we talk about strengths based in social work, but really that's just like lip service, to be real, because um, if we really did strengths based, we would do something like what we learned on what we talked about in our live, like really focusing on the person's assets, like what they bring, right? Like all the kind of healing and spiritual based practices, the sort of resources that they already have. We're not taught that in social work. We're taught the opposite. We're taught that we are the resource, that we are better than the people that we serve. And we have to unlearn that daily. And
Mhm.
I think you're right. That might be a bigger topic for another episode, but let us know in the comments. Maybe it is connected to this episode. What are your thoughts about white saviorism in our profession and how it impacts, BIPOC folks, queer folks, like people who are already like kind of living in the margins. So let us know. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure we made space for that because that's powerful.
Cool. I appreciate, that pause and really like seeing where that resonates and lands, and processing through that a little bit more. We were kind of talking about, what problematic lessons or teachings have you learned from social work school, that you are ready to unlearn. And I want to add this. And then we can kind of move on if you want to, some very specific things that we're specific areas that we're unlearning. But, I feel like this is really important related to social work history and how that impacts our practice. Because again, this is the lens that we're being taught the practice of social work, right? And so I right before we had hopped on here, I was telling Biani that I had went back through some previous Facebook groups that I was in looking for this link that I'm going to read to you all that I think is really important because, I always have to go back and not always, let me not say it like that, but there are times where whenever this conversation about Jane Addams and her being a racist, but specifically more about social work history and what we are and aren't taught in social work related to the history of the profession, I always go back and forth, specifically with white women social workers, about whether Jane Addams was a racist or not, And so, yeah, I went back to and one of my therapist groups that I'm in and looked at this thread and pulled out this link and just wanted to um, read this to folks. And this came out June 2021 on socialworkers.org website, and the article is entitled NASW Apologizes for Racist Practices in American Social Work. And this was around the time of the murder of George Floyd, and they named some very specific instances in American social work history that I feel like are really important to highlight when we have these conversations about how has the history of social work, how can it impact our practice, right? Because again, this is the lens that we're getting our lessons from about what social work is. And I just want to read this really quickly. But as the nation looks at its long, cruel history of systemic racism, NASW acknowledges that our profession and this association have not always lived up to our mission of pursuing social justice for all. NASW apologizes for supporting policies and activities that have harmed people of color. And they said, while NASW continues to offer anti-racist training in communities, publicly denounces violence, and advocates tirelessly for anti-racist policy changes, we must acknowledge the role of the social work profession has played in supporting discriminatory systems and programs for decades. For instance, progressive era social workers built and ran segregated settlement houses. Social workers, suffragists blocked African Americans from gaining the right to vote. Prominent social workers supported eugenics theories and programs. Social workers helped recruit Black men into the infamous Tuskegee experiment. Social workers participated in the removal of Native American children from their families and placement in boarding schools. Social workers also took part in intake teams at Japanese internment camps during World War II. And since the founding of the profession, bias among some social workers has limited delivery of healthcare, mental health treatment, and social services to people of color. So when we are in these courses and we're teaching about social work history, it's also like what is actively happening that we have to unlearn. What types of historical things are actively happening. Like I even think about, we have this big push around this trend related to abolitionist social work, but then also when Trump was in his presidency, what about all of the migrant and camps that he set up, where children and families were separated? Social workers were a part of that. you know. I think about what's happening in Texas related to LGBTQ gender affirming care and children that are in custody of Department of Children and Family Services there, and how they are criminalizing people who facilitate gender affirming care, right? So when we think about this, right, like, yeah, we have like this push towards abolitionist social work. It's been happening, since the pandemic. And also there are these very concrete ways that social workers are still actively engaging in these harmful practices.
Woosah. I am, I mean, yeah. I'm sitting with, I really appreciate you grounding us in the reality that in every moment of our nation's history, quote unquote, social workers have been a part of perpetuating. Like, we've been upholding this history, and it's still happening today. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that we hear it too. I'm thinking of people on social media, saying things like, if you're a social worker who voted for Trump, you shouldn't be a social worker. And I think it's interesting because it's actually ahistorical, right? Because if we think of the history of social work has always upheld supremacy. It's not actually, it's actually ahistorical to suggest that, like, if social, like, this idea of social justice, the way that NASW talks about social justice, is not abolitionist, is not freedom centered, is not Black liberation. indigenous liberation. It's not focused on our freedom. It
Mm-hmm.
is focused on perpetuating the system,
Mm-hmm.
because the history of social work has been about upholding the system. And we have to own those ugly parts of social work in order for us to really do this work of abolition, of freedom. I'm very careful of using that term abolition, because I'm still in that journey of what does it mean for me as a social worker. Like, I'm very careful, because I don't like, I can't give myself that name. That's just me. I can't give myself that name. I feel like I have to earn it and I have to do the work. And I think I agree with you. I think there's a way of us not knowing our history, and we have to own it, because it shows up in our practice. Absolutely. It shows up in our relationship with others, how we hold space for community, how we hold space for ourselves. Um, like, social workers have been a part of all these like um, hurtful moments in history. And yet the narrative has been, oh, we've been like on the end of like justice, and it's like, that's not the only truth. Like, we have to hold that we've also been on the other side of it. Um,
Definitely.
and when we're talking about Jane Addams, we're not just talking about Jane Addams, right? We're also talking about
Definitely.
what Sequoia just mentioned, y'all. Like, you might have to rewind that part and hear it again, because these progressive era politics that we are so proud of, and I hear it all the time. Not just I hear it from white social workers, but I hear it from other social workers who really want to hold on to this idea of us being progressive, that we've always been on the right side of history. And I don't think that's true. It's really not true. And I think it's dangerous for us to and then we position ourselves as saviors when we hold on to that narrative by being like, oh,
Definitely.
we've been on the right side of history. No, actually, that's not true. It's not true. And we have to own that.
Oh.
Woo, woosah, woosah. uh, yeah, I'm sitting with like, and I think I said this before in earlier episodes. And if you follow us on IG, Sequoia and I have been talking a lot about how we've come to this field. I don't want to take us away from our topic, but I want to hold that my experience with social workers came from the harm that was done to me and my family from case managers who were social workers, who were racist towards us, who were rude, mean, were gatekeeping from services. And I know I'm not alone in that. I know many people who have felt similarly, and who've been done harm. Um, and yeah, I know some people are going to be like, oh, they're case managers, they're not social workers. All right, cool. We can get lost in semantics, or we can stick with the truth that this is a part of our profession. That much of social work history, we've been like we've been supporting and upholding the system. We've worked for the system. We've worked for the system, not the people. And we want to invite y'all to make space for this unlearning. Just like I'm Musa and I'm taking my deep breath, like I'm owning it. We want you to own it too. Like, we're on many sides of history. Like, some of us might be on the right side, but it's actually more nuanced than that. Jane
Definitely.
Addams is a part of our history.
Mm-hmm.
Ida B. Wells is a
Mm-hmm.
part of our history. Um, and the white social workers that Sequoia was in like disagreement, they're a part of our history too. I'm not comfortable knowing that there are social workers out there who are transphobic, who are supporting these laws in Texas, who are anti-abortion, who are anti-human, who, you know what I mean? Like, we have to hold that those people exist right now too, and they're a part of our profession.
I appreciate that reflection, and also apologize for the background if you hear the grass getting cut. Um, but yeah, I wonder how would you how should we kind of wrap things up, related to this conversation on, and again, this very important question, like what problematic lessons or teachings have you learned from social work? And I guess I can add to that as I pose that question, like I can add to it. One of the things that I will offer as a solution, as a place to ground, is related to this problematic piece around school is, you know, to always stay up, keep your knowledge up related to what's actually happening in your communities. How are people, communities, individuals, even organizations being impacted by, laws, other types of policies and things like that, because that is ultimately how you continue to stay grounded in the reality of things. Um,
Mm,
yeah,
I love
that's what I'm
that.
at.
Yeah, I love that. I also think too, one of the things that I feel like is important around our unlearning journey is to really be like, ask questions, stay curious, ask questions. Don't take things as truth because you learned it from somebody in school, right? Like, do your research. Like, if there's a part of you in your gut that's like, this doesn't sit right with me, explore it, connect with others. There are other truths. I think the reality of these social work programs is that I think there's a way, and I said this, I don't know if I said it on IG Live or when we were talking, that they want to make certain people in our program feel good or something.
Mm,
like making, at least I would say, maybe white social workers feel good about being in this profession. You're doing good work. You are progressive. You are on the right side of history. You're not a bad person, right? I think sometimes I feel like our experience with social work has been really focusing on people feeling good about what they're doing, justifying their behavior, and trying to act like it's right or good or appropriate or effective. And that really doesn't sit well. And I would say, as a person who attended social work and was always like one of only, it never sat well with me. They were so focused on making these white social workers feel good about, oh, these good white folks who cared about children, who cared about, segregation and schooling. Like, I think that's sort of what Jane Addams represents. She represents this trope of like, she was a good person. She wasn't racist. She she was against segregation. She was anti-lynching, and not holding the fullness of that, of her story, that actually she was a racist. And it doesn't discredit all the work that she's done, right? But it needs to hold her accountable for that too. Just like it needs to hold our fellow social workers accountable. Um, And yeah, I would say, if you feel that in your gut, listen to that, trust that part of you. And like Sequoia said, like, yeah, for sure, research it, ask questions. Um, don't tuck it away. Don't silence that part of you that's really like, this doesn't sit right with me. If it doesn't, it's because it's probably not right. Like, really, really trust that. Um, yeah, I think that's what I want to say.
okay.
I know we need a part two for this, but
Yeah, yeah, we definitely got to get into part two, so we can, kind of revisit some of the additional places, that we are unlearning. I I know that we talked about kind of solutions or places to ground around, problematic things that we learn from school. Um, you want to get in the main takeaways?
sure, sure.
Okay, okay.
Excuse me.
I think for me, one of the main takeaways is, just really thinking more about, goodness, I'm so sorry. Can you hear that?
It doesn't sound loud to me.
Okay, okay, cool.
I'm sorry, it
Um,
sounds loud to you, I bet.
yeah. So one of the main takeaways for me is just really about how important historical context is even in social work.
Mm,
And also like what's actively happening now, what how are how are students in the future going to be learning about this time now related to the social work profession and social work history? Are they going to be writing in our social work history books like the things that I'm just mentioned, and how social workers were a part of that? Or are they just going to focus on certain areas? So, like, that's kind of, I think those are two main takeaways for me.
Yeah, I'm sitting here because there's so many gems. I'm sitting with the kind of um, one of the takeaways I'm sitting with is like the history for sure, like being rooted in that, and um, like doing our research and trusting our gut around like what happens when we're in these spaces. And then also, I'm realizing just one of the takeaways is that the unlearning process is daily. Like you're constantly unlearning. Like that's my biggest takeaway. Like you think you know, and then there's more need to know. So I kind of am sitting with the we have to remember to be students, to always be using a beginner's mind and be in a space of curiosity and asking questions. Like that's really staying with me because there's still parts of our history that we don't know. And and you're right. And how are people going to talk about history today? Like during the pandemic, post pandemic, but yeah, like just being a student, like always like having a beginner's mind, like that's what I'm really sitting with right now. Like continuing to ask questions, um, challenging what we've been taught, like that is really sitting with me right now. Um, and also realizing today that I have more questions, and you lovely person who's tuning in, I hope that you have more questions too, because this process is going to keep, it's going to keep expanding us, right? And encouraging us to be more critical. And we should have more questions than answers. Um, anything else you want to add, friend? Or
Nope, I think that's it for main takeaways.
great. So y'all, we are at the end of episode 7. And we want to thank you for being here with us for our first topic of this new season. Jane Addams was a racist and other things to unlearn in our journey as social workers. And we want to invite you back in 2 weeks. Come check us out for part 2 of this series, because there is more to unlearn, and we want you to be here to unlearn with us. So join us for part 2 of Jane Addams was a racist and other things we need to unlearn on September 26th, 5:30 p.m. Central, 6:30 p.m. Eastern. And oh, wait, Sequoia, one more thing. Please tell us in the comments if there's anything from today that really resonated with you, something new that you might have learned that you didn't know, or if you have questions, just please let us know in the comments. We'd love to engage with you there. And now I'm done.
Thanks again for being in community with us and supporting a Heart Center podcast by two queer Black femme healers and spiritual social workers to explore the intersection of magic, spirituality, identity, and ancestral connections through the lens of tarot, divination, mysticism, mental health, and everything in between. We love to stay connected with you all, so please make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can turn on reminders and notifications so that you're sent an email when we are getting ready to go live. And then you want to sign up at our website for access to the newsletter. And then, yeah, for more check-ins on the first quarter moon, our offerings, events, and updates. And we'll see you all on the 26th.